Thank you for coming. Tonight, our first film is one of my favorites, Brute Force. Great film. Has anyone not seen Brute Force? You're in for a real treat. I kind of envy you in a way. And tonight, we have a special guest, a great gentleman, a great trial lawyer, an accomplished gent in his own right, but he is also the nephew of the great Jules Dassin, who has directed 3 of the films, including Brute Force, that you're about to see tonight. So please welcome Ron Goldman, who is here with us tonight. Thank you. So Ron, this is great. Thanks for coming. And just to start with, Jules Dassin, your family, a little background on the Jules Dassin. We all know him as the great director. I had a correspondence with him briefly near the end of his life, but talk about the family.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. This is
absolutely.
really quite an honor, and I'm so pleased that my Uncle Jules' films are still doing so well, and I think you're going to be amazed with what you see. Those who haven't seen it, I think you're in for an incredible treat.
Absolutely.
My Uncle Jules, which, by the way, his youngest daughter's name is Julie, so when we were together, he was Uncle Jules, not Julie. When we were not at home, he was Julie because Julie wasn't there. So
okay, I got it.
So he was my mother's brother, and there were 7 children in the family. We came to California in 1942 when Jules was already established. We were living in New York at the time.
Right.
So Jules had 3 children. Joe was the oldest. Joe became an amazing crooner after he graduated from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. As many of you probably know, Jules was blacklisted during the height of the McCarthy era. And so this was a tremendous problem and trauma to our family. I'll never forget the night he came over. We were living in North Hollywood at the time on Victory Boulevard. And he came over to tell my mother and my father, but primarily his sister, and that he was having to leave the country because he couldn't get work. He had been blacklisted, and he and many of his friends and people that we knew were in this terrible situation, and it was traumatic. My mother cried a long time. The separation was difficult, and she knew that it would be on rare occasions from then on that you would actually be seeing him. He went to England first, had difficulty working there. He got some work, and then eventually moved to France. I think most of you know that he lived for a very long time in France until he met Melina McCrory and struck up a relationship with her. He had been married to my Aunt Bee Launer, who was an accomplished musician. She had been a graduate of Juilliard, and she played first violin with Pablo Casals. And I have such fond memories of being in their house, not far from here on Bronson Avenue, and she would be practicing, and I would very often just sit and listen to her play the violin, and I think that was part of what made me fall in love with classical music, was listening to my aunts practicing on the violin. So the family was literally torn apart by this terrible time in the blacklist, and Jules was really the pillar of the family in so many ways. And for those of you who will be watching his films, let me tell you, he was one of the most brilliant individuals I ever met in my life. Well-read, with an uncanny ability to call up literature that he had read and use it at the appropriate time. So and there's a little sketch of the family.
He always, in his letters to me and in the interviews, he always had this kind of puckish sense of humor about stuff, and despite being driven out of his own country for nothing, he maintained a sense of humor, a sense of perspective. He never struck me as being bitter when he had every right to be bitter.
Well, he was never bitter, but that's not to say he wasn't angry.
Right.
And he was, in fact, very angry. I think there was an anecdote I would share that when Elia Kazan was being honored by the Academy, of course, his body of work is significant, substantial, and important, but Elia Kazan had decided to name names to the House Un-American Activities Committee. This was the height of McCarthyism, and it was just a horrible period of time politically in the country. When Jules found out that they were going to give him the Academy Honorary Award for his body of work, Jules wrote to the Academy and said, it reminded him of the story of a Civil War soldier who, during the Battle of Gettysburg, had a severely wounded leg that left him with a permanently crippled leg. Later on, after the war and some years passed, the soldier committed a murder, was convicted of the murder, and was sentenced to hang. When the time came for him to hang, they said to him, "Is there any last wish that you have?" And he said, I have but one. And they said, "What's that?" And he said, "My last wish is that you amputate my injured leg so that the better part of me be not dishonored by this hanging." So that was Jules'
A very eloquent rebuttal to the Academy and Kazan. When you were growing up, did you spend a lot of time with him, and what was that time like? I remember you shared a couple things with me, but I'm sure our audience would be interested.
We shared some time together. Jules was very busy. I spent a lot of time with Joe in particular. He was 1 year younger than I, and so we were kids together. We came to Hollywood together. We watched movies together. We collected stamps together. But Jules was always somebody that was fun to be around. He had a great sense of humor, by the way. He was not at all a stuffed shirt. He was personable, and he was fun. And I will tell you, one of the highlights of my youth was having had the opportunity to play charades with Jules and Burt Lancaster, who's in this movie, and other Hollywood stars. It was great fun, and I'll always remember it.
Yeah. I didn't. You had mentioned something in the lobby when we were talking Peter Lorre.
Well, Peter Lorre was, yes, also one of the guests that frequented Jules' house. He was a character. He was always a character. But
He was a true character. It was unique.
My mother's sister, Betty, and her husband, Walter, were married in Peter Lorre's and Celia Lorre's house.
Wow.
So
nice.
that's how close they
nice.
were, yeah.
Well, I originally wrote your uncle because I was writing, about 20 years ago, I was writing my first book on Charlie McGraw, who makes a brief appearance throwing Molotov cocktails in this movie. Good thing for Charlie. I asked him, did he know him, and this and that. And then I asked him some specific questions about his films, including this one. And I said, you know, the tagline and the kind of narrative, the men on the inside and the women on the outside and all of that stuff, I said, was that something that you had to do, that Mark Hellinger and the studio made you do, or did you come up with that? And his letter, I'll never forget it, I opened his letter and he wrote in longhand on this pad, and he said, "Dear Mr. Rohde, thank you for writing. As to your first question, you already answered it yourself." But I know he spoke very disparagingly of his work at MGM, even though some of those movies, I think, do have quality, but I think he was unhappy there because he was under a 7-year contract and he was being told what to do and what films he would make, and he didn't like that. And one of his stories was he wouldn't make a movie that L.B. Mayer wanted him to make, so he just stayed home, and they kept paying him his salary. And he was getting his salary for doing nothing, which was driving him nuts. And then finally there was a showdown meeting with Mayer, and Mayer had this kind of really paternalistic, demeaning, insulting way about him that Julie didn't like, and he compared Julie's intransience to one of his racehorses, who was a gelding, and Julie said, "You SOB, you're not going to take my balls off." And that was the end of his MGM contract. He was released. So at any rate. But do you have any particular favorites of your uncle's movies?
Let me just say this, that
Sure.
it runs in the family. We don't like to take orders. So,
Well, your own career as a trial lawyer has been evidence of that. One of the things that I immediately connected me with Ron is he said, "I spent 60 years never representing a corporation, but going after them." So I thought that was great. I thought that was fabulous.
it's a little difficult to pick a favorite in these films. Brute Force is, in fact, one of them.
Sure.
Rififi is an amazing film.
It is. And he's one of the stars.
And he's one of the actors.
Yeah, I mean, by star, I mean he plays a prominent part. He's not just...
He does.
Yeah.
But he plays the lead role in Never on Sunday.
Correct.
Which is nothing but fun. Melina is amazing in that film.
Absolutely.
I think it's the body of work that I look at, and the fun I have thinking about it, and whether it's Thieves Highway, which tells an amazing story also, that I think you're going to show that as well. And I'm very honored that Film Noir and the American Cinematheque is showing 3 of Jules' films in this festival.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. I mean,
that by itself is amazing.
Thieves Highway is a perennial favorite. I know it's a favorite of Eddie Muller and of mine, and Brute Force, and of course Rififi really is the gold standard many consider for heist films.
So Jules was the first to film on the streets of a city when he did Naked City. They said it couldn't be done. He did it. That film is now another one of the amazing works, and he broke the barrier and showed how that could be done. Then he made Rififi, and he invented, in a way, the heist movie. And all of the films, he was the progenitor, so whether you see Mission Impossible or Ocean's 11 or 7 or 2 or whatever they're up to in numbers these days, but all of those really owe their history to Jules' work in figuring out the heist movie. And when you see Rififi, and the trailer showed you this about 30 minutes of no dialogue and no music. It's just acting, and it is, I think, in my opinion anyway, one of the most suspenseful 30 minutes in all filmdom.
Well said, well said. And to wrap up, Brute Force, the casting in this was, I think, Burt Lancaster's 3rd or 4th film. He was a star, but you don't have the Burt of the gleaming teeth and Elmer Gantry going, ha, 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 like that, because Hal Wallace hadn't sent him out to get all his teeth capped. So his mouth's rather closed, but he is terrific. Hume Cronin in this is the epitome of evil. He is terrific. And Art Smith, who was another unfortunate victim of the blacklist, some of the scenes in this movie between Art Smith and Hume Cronin are just tremendous. Jeff Corey became Hollywood's most foremost acting teacher after he was blacklisted, is in this. Bud Bonin, who was the leader of the group theater and was unfortunately blacklisted, somebody else. There are just great performances in this movie, and Mark Hellinger, who started out, was a newspaper columnist, kind of wrote Al Henrik's stories about Broadway and New York, and wore a black suit with a white tie, kind of aping the gangster look. He and Jules Dassin said, Hellinger was really good, he was enthusiastic, supportive, but he thought every scene should end like one of his articles with a climax and everything. And I said, I had to explain to him, that's not how you make movies, you have to, with the narrative. But I think Hellinger and Jules Dassin wanted to make a realistic prison movie, which had not been made until this time, and they were greatly successful with it, and they had a tooth and nail battle with the censors. And without revealing anything else, when you watch the film, you'll see why. So, any rate, with that, Ron, it's been such a pleasure meeting you, talking to you, and having you come here and talk about your uncle. And I think his work and his memory have stood the test of time, certainly here at the American Cinematheque and the Egyptian Theater. And thanks to you so much for coming.
And I thank you very much. And I would like to leave the folks with one thought, that
Sure.
One of the really important things you should know about Jules is that his moral compass was always pointing due north.
Well said. Thank you.